Hello everybody, a warm welcome back to True to Form. Myself, Sam Turner, back with you for another edition. And before we get too deeply into the menu for this week's edition, I would very much like to thank you all for tuning in and watching the A to Z guide that we produced last week for the Grand National. Over 26,000 views of that podcast. I think that's quite an extraordinary number. So many thanks to you for those of you who did tune in and watch. Particular thanks to my mum who watched it 19,500 times. So cheers for that, Sylv. But I would also say as well, it was a bit disappointing not to find the winner, but hopefully some of you found it beneficial in trying to find the winner yourselves. And with bookmakers paying down to 7 places, hopefully one or two of you back Senior Chief or even Manila Kakuna each way and got a little bit of place money back. Percival Galwar, the headline selection, unfortunately crashed out early. 3-car Bragg was given a pretty aggressive ride from the front and didn't get home. But we had a reasonable run for our money with Senior Chief and Manila Kakuna, who I thought was a little bit unlucky because his saddle slipped early on, according to Johnny Burke, and that probably contributed to a few of his errors throughout the race. And he ended up a little bit punch drunk on the run-in, and I don't think that was his true running. I think he's a stronger stayer than that. But anyway, we move on. I will have a look later on in the podcast at one or two Aintree aces, horses that really caught the eye on the data, or doing a deep dive into the closing stages of the Grand National. And was there one horse that was particularly unlucky not to win? Maybe the data will shine a little bit of light on that. There's a 16-1 anti-post selection for Cheltenham. Don't shout it, just whisper it. The C word makes a reappearance on the podcast just 3 or 4 weeks after the conclusion of the festival, but I do think there's a good angle in on this race, and it's definitely a race that we should be targeting. And there'll also be a look ahead to Ayr, the Scottish National Meeting, usually brilliantly attended, some brilliant racing up there, all on pretty quick ground. So hopefully I'll identify one or two of the fast ground performers or the good ground performers, horses that love spring conditions, and fingers crossed we can find a few winners there over that weekend. Okay, well, let's get on with the anti-post selection first then. 16-1, what's not to like about this very much up-and-coming chaser? So betting anti-post on jumps horses, 11 months in advance is not for everybody. I totally get that. But indulge me with this selection anyway. And the anti-post bet that I like here is Khalif de Burley in the Champion Chase, the Queen Mother Champion Chase, Cheltenham next year. Of course, this is a horse that won the McGall Novices Chase in really good fashion, Grade 1 on Saturday. It was a bit of after the Lord Mayor's show with that race now taking place straight after the Grand National. It's an odd decision for me that, rather than having the conditional jockeys and amateur rider handicap hurdle straight afterwards. But anyway, they ran that race there, and it was an exemplary front-running ride really from Harry Cobden aboard this improving chaser from Paul Nicholls' yard. He is 16-1 for the Champion Chase, and I'll go into the reasons why I think that's a fair price pretty shortly. The 3.5 length defeat of Brookie in its own right is probably not Champion Chase form, obviously, but the manner of his jumping was superb. He again proved that he's pretty electric from the front, and he was just another one of the Nicholls horses that bounced off the spring ground, like Caldwell Potter, like Sombreux, and really did put in a really smart round of jumping. Now, this horse has run 5 times over fences, so he's accrued a fair bit of experience, which is encouraging. He fell at Carlisle first time up, where he probably would have won. And his only other defeat came in the Scilly Isles Novices Chase, where he had to run in that race because Connections wanted to run Load of Sud in the Kingmaker at Warwick. He ended up going into that race 2.5 mile heavy ground. It was just an absolute pointless exercise, really. I think if Paul Nicholls could have had his way to run in the Arkle Chase, and he might well have won it given the way that it's turned out. But his other wins, obviously he won at Cheltenham, he beat Vincenzo, and he clocked his best racing IQ jump index at Cheltenham as well, which is encouraging going forward with a view to the Champion Chase. He was again exemplary on Saturday, brilliant from the front, and I don't think that race was ever really in any danger for him. I thought the victory was almost signed, sealed and delivered after he jumped a couple of fences and got into such a great rhythm under Harry Cobden, who really is proving a wonderfully talented rider from the front. Now, looking at the betting for the Champion Chase, Sergino is 7-2 favourite. He's had 1 run over fences. I know he's a supremely talented horse, but that one chase start saw him beat Ballyburn. That form's hardly been endorsed, has it, by subsequent events. He's lacking a little bit of experience as well. I know he's supremely talented, as I've just touched on, but, you can't beat chasing experience, especially when going to championship races. And by the time, fingers crossed, Khalif de Burle might get to Cheltenham in March, he will have had 7 or 8 chase starts and will be really honed and sort of battle hardened to it. So I think that's a positive. John Bond's 7-1. His best 7 career efforts have all come away from Cheltenham. And for some reason, the Cheltenham Festival doesn't seem to be for him. He'll also be a year older. 8-1 Majborough, prone to the odd error, prone to the odd mistake, as we saw in the Arkle. 8-1 Marine Nationale, a very talented horse, but as we saw in the run-in, when it wasn't a done deal that he was going to beat Calixios, who's 25-1 for the Champion Chase next year. 14-1 Factor File. He has a raft of opportunities. He could stay at the Ryanair trip. He could go to the King George. He might even come back for the 2-miler, and then he would be a major threat. But they're big ifs and buts, and dropping back to that minimum trip and going the pace might not be ideal for him. 25 Ile-Francais, got physical problems, doesn't seem to see his races out. So all of a sudden, you're looking down the list and thinking, well, is there an up-and-coming chaser that I think can make a real impact at that level? And I think Khalif de Burle is that. I think it might have almost been a blessing in disguise that perhaps he didn't go to the Arkle. And he is going to be a slightly fresher horse next year. He'll have a good summer at grass. He won't have had too many battle scars, but he will have accrued a good experience. And I think 16-1 for him really does make some appeal. Now, there wasn't a lot of difference in the going allowances through the 3 days on the chase course. It was slightly slower on the Thursday. Looking at the times, Impere Pass for the final 4 furlongs did 54.94. Well, the final 4 furlongs for Khalif de Burle was 54.73. Now, there was a very, very marginal difference in the going allowances from Thursday to Saturday. So he was marginally slower, despite making all the running himself over the 2 miles than Impere Pass, who's a class individual, obviously. And he was markedly quicker than John Bond, admittedly over an extra 4 furlongs. And John Bond, on ground that was actually quicker on the Friday, clocked 60.25. So when you think that Khalif de Burle's done 54.73, that's quite astonishing, really. And these two could end up meeting in March. So I know it's a very small sample size, and it's always dangerous to compare times from different days. But with you factor the going allowance into it, Khalif de Burle, 16-1, looks pretty decent value to me. With 8 winners across the Grand National meeting then, I'm not sure Liverpool's seen such dominance since the days of Bill Shankly and Bob Paisley, but Willie Mullins continues to carry all before him in the National Hunt season, not least in the UK as well, where he looks set, with his odds on now, to become the champion trainer for the 2nd year running, clawing back over $1 million on Dan Skelton from the start of the week. So quite extraordinary figures that. He had the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 7th home in the National, as I'm sure you're all fully aware. And he was a bit unlucky not to have the first 5 home, in all truth, because Meeting the Waters picked up a slight injury in the closing stages of Saturday's National. And of course, the saddle slipped on Manila Kakuna at an early stage as well. He accrued a fair few mistakes on his way round, and Johnny Burke worked wonders really to get him into 7th. So could have easily been the first 5 home. Of course, Willie didn't waste long in doing that in a gravy race, because 24 hours later at Fairyhouse, he managed to saddle the first 5 home. So just extraordinary achievements really all round from the Plus Sutton team. And was he a little bit fortunate that Nick Rocket and his son Patrick actually won the Grand National? Because the 3rd home, Grangeclere West, if you dig deep into the data from that performance on Saturday, he was a bit unfortunate not to win the National himself for Cheveley Park and Brian Hayes. Look at that last fence mistake where he came to almost a shuddering halt. He did remarkably well to only be beaten 3 lengths. And if you look at the Race IQ data, he lost 7.83 miles per hour at that last fence. Nick Rocket lost 4. His recovery time was 2.7 seconds from that error. Nick Rocket's was 0.46, so over 2 seconds more recovery time for Grangeclere West from that last fence blunder. And when we say that, perhaps a second is worth 4 lengths in jump racing, depending on the speed of the horses at that stage and the distance, that's 7 or 8 lengths that Grangeclere West has lost probably from that mistake at the last. He was beaten 3. The jump index tells us that it was his worst jump of the round as well, at 4.6, that rating. So I know I'm throwing a lot of data at you, but it just goes to show what an influence that last race, that last fence blunder had on Grangeclere West. His worst jumps actually came at fences 29 and 30, whereas Nick Rocket's best jumps came at 28 and 29. So while he was gaining lengths on his rivals, Grangeclair West was losing them. And it was a remarkable performance for him to be beaten 3 lengths. Interesting, he came out of that minor race at Navan as well, which also produced Gentleman de Me. So that would have been some notable race, really, out of that 2.5 mile race won by Senesia. Iron Maximus, in contrast, he lost 5 miles an hour at the last fence, but his recovery time was really good, 0.3, and that's why he managed to get himself into contention. And just one other pointer with Iroko, he lost 4.85 at the last fence, and his recovery time was 2.1 seconds. His jump index as well was 6.6, and he was just getting into the race at fence, the 3 out, fence 28, and he made his worst mistake of the round there as well, which stopped him in his tracks a little bit. So I think that perhaps Iroko can be upgraded. He definitely wants a bit of cut in the ground for me as well. That was a bit of an issue for him. I think the ground was plenty lively enough on Saturday. That's why he got so far out of his ground. But just that data for Grangeclair West, I think he's a really unfortunate horse not to have gone even closer in the Grand National. Let's pinpoint 2 or 3 more names then that caught the eye from Aintree. Great week there, and we'll start off with Liv Conti, who finished second in the anniversary hurdle behind Merseyside, the impressive winner, admittedly. Now, he looked a bit novice-y, didn't he? A little bit green through that race. He dived left at a couple of hurdles. He'd only really won at Wetherby in an egg and spoon race, really, on his debut for Current Connections Dan Skelton. And he stepped up on that performance markedly at Aintree, overcoming some novice jumps. He was keen, he was exuberant, he just looked like a horse that was learning on the job, really, at Grade 1 level. He actually managed to gain 3 lengths on his field, which was quite extraordinary, really, given the way that he was a little bit slovenly at his hurdles. And his jump index was 7.6, which was more than adequate and satisfactory. He reportedly stays over hurdles next year, and that'll be interesting to see which races they sort of pinpoint with him, because he looked like a really talented novice chaser in the making, to be honest. And I think that will be his game. He looks to have plenty of size and strength. He looks quite a robust model. I think he's going to make some novice chaser when he does actually tackle fences. But he's definitely one for the notebook, Liv Conti, or Liv Conti if you prefer. Day 2 then, and Kopek de Me's run was very eye-catching in the William Hill Handicap Hurdle. Now, this lad is a virtual antithesis of a National Hunt dark horse, having been touted by the entire world to win the Martin Pipe off what was conceivably, or what was expected to be, a very lenient mark. Now, he flopped big time in that race. He was shocking. But this was much more the real deal from Kopek de Me, who charged home after being quite tenderly ridden at the bottom of the straight at Aintree. And that was indicative of the fact that he was actually, from the 4 furlong point, 5 lengths quicker than Salvatore Mundi took to win the Grade 1. So 1.28 seconds he was quicker from 4 furlongs out, which suggests that, you know, he's a horse of immense quality and ability. And I'd be amazed if he doesn't leave that handicap mark behind going forward. Somewhere like Punchestown, maybe, if they turn him out quickly, or even Galway. There'll be a major plan for Kopek de Me. You can bet on that. And his jump index of 9.4 was clearly the best in the race. He gained 5.5 lengths. So this was a ride by Mark Walsh, I think, just to hit the line strong. And if you've got a chance of winning, then do so. But let's make sure that we've got something to go home with Kopek de Me and something to build on for the future. They certainly got that. I think he's a horse of immense potential. Definitely one to keep on side going forward in some nice races, I think. Third and finally, Jordan's, a horse that chased home Caldwell Potter in the Mildmay Novices Chase over 3 miles. Now, he took the step up in trip in his stride. Yet again, though, this performance was blighted by errors. If you read through the last 5 Race IQ jump indexes, 5.7, 4.9, 6, 6.6 at Cheltenham, where he lost 7 3/4 lengths on his field, and was only beaten 6 lengths by Jaguar in a competitive handicap. And then at Aintree, he lost 3.39 lengths on his field, but did actually manage to record one of his best Race IQ jump indexes of 7.5. Now, I think that might be because of the step up in trip. It might be because they go a yard slower over 3 than they do over 2.5, and that has just allowed JJ Slevin to organise him a little better. But I think he's a horse with a tremendous engine to record those jump IQ metrics when he's still finishing behind Impere Pass in a Grade 1. He's chasing home Jaguar in a competitive handicap, and he's finishing second to Caldwell Potter over 3 miles for the first time. I think those are extraordinary performances, really, given that he doesn't jump with any great fluency. If they can work on that and tinker with his technique, I think he's going to be a smart horse going forward. Who knows, he might end up in a King George and looking to win it for the second time for the stable in as many years. So national season rolls round to Ayr on Saturday with the Scottish Grand National, sponsored by Corals, of course, and really competitive heat, as you would expect. 33 past the confirmation stage on Monday, 11 of which are trained by Willie Mullins, who looks to have got a grasp of that trainer's title for the second successive year. I do fancy one of his to run well at a big price if he's allowed to take his chance, and that's Spanish Harlem. But he's not my primary selection. That would be Surrey Quest, who was beaten literally a quarter of an inch in last year's race. A tremendous effort from Toby Law's chaser. Quite how he didn't win, I don't know, because he was in front about a yard from the line. But anyway, he lost on the bob. I think he can gain some redemption and some reward for some solid efforts subsequently in Saturday's renewal. Like the way that he went about his business last year, I think he gained over 20 lengths on his field on the Race IQ Jump Index. 8.7 was his metric as well. So clearly likes air, clearly likes spring ground. Is a fresh horse coming here in good nick as well off the back of that Musselburgh run. He's been given a nice break since then. I think that was an inadequate enough test for him, believe it or not, that race round Musselburgh. I just don't think it played to his strengths. He always looked a little bit on the collar on that tight track, certainly going right-handed. I think going left-handed will see him to better effect, and I'd be disappointed if he didn't run a massive race. 16 to 1 for him looks very fair value indeed. The second pick would be Wise Guy, Nicky Henderson's horse here, who looks as though for all the world a test of stamina would really bring about some improvement, be the catalyst to a progressive and improved display in this race. I think a bit of good ground, nice galloping track, 4 miles would be ideal for him. He started off his season with a good win at Newbury over 2 miles and 6, and has just looked as if a little bit tap for toe in 2 subsequent runs at Ascot behind Victorino. Only beaten 6 lengths that day, staying on nicely up the straight, and then went 7th in the Kim Muir last time. I think that race will have brought him on nicely. He's had a break since. I think going to Ayr will be an absolute perfect venue for him. 25 to 1 for him is very tasty. I think he's at the right end of the weight. 129 doesn't look at all badly handicapped. I just wonder whether the 7 Barrows handler has had this race in mind for him for some time. The third selection then, just to wind up with Spanish Harlem. 33s or 25s available in the village. I think that's very fair. I thought he ran really well last year. He was only a 12 to 1 poke with Paul Townend on last year, and shaped with a good degree of promise. I think he'd have been very much closer if he hadn't made his worst jumping error at the first, which set him on the back foot, and then 4 out just as they turned into the straight. He looked as though he was going to latch on to the main protagonist, and unfortunately there just made an error, lost a couple of lengths. I think it was his second worst jump on the data, and that just knocked the stuffing out of him. But he stayed on steadily enough to finish 6th. I think with a lot of enhanced places floating about in the village on Saturday, I think he's well worth a small play at 33 to 1. Right, elsewhere on the card on Saturday, the Coral Scottish Champion Hurdle. I like Ethical Diamond here. He was a notable eye-catcher when running so well in the county hurdle behind his stablemate Card Yes. I think he'll go very well if he's allowed to take his chance. The good ground must surely suit a horse that was pretty useful on the flat over sort of 10 furlongs or 12 furlongs. He must have that latent speed, you'd imagine. And then just 24 hours earlier on the Friday, and also like the claims of Florida Dreams, who steps up in trip after finishing 5th in a Greatwood, 5th in a Moor Battle. I think he's had this race as his ideal plan for the back end of the season for some little time. So I expect the both of those to run particularly well in that 4:25 on Friday afternoon. Okay, just remains for me to say thanks very much for tuning in again this week. I'll be back on Tuesday with all of my thoughts from Ayr on Saturday and over the weekend. Some eye catchers, some anti-post picks for Fairy House. I look forward to joining you then. Bye for now.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.